A very good evening and welcome to Wednesday's edition of Cross Question. Now, our panel tonight consists of Dame Andrea Leadsom, Conservative MP for South Northamptonshire, former Cabinet Minister. Alistair Carmichael is Liberal Democrat MP for Orkney and Shetland and the party's Home Affairs spokesperson. We have Tom Hamilton with us, former Head of Research for the Labour Party and co-author of the book Punch and Judy Politics, an Insider's Guide to Prime Minister's Questions. And Alva Ray, a journalist who's the host of Politico's Westminster Insider podcast. They are here, ready, willing and able, I hope, to answer all of your questions. The number to call 0345 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850 or you can ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC, and you can watch us on Global Player.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Welcome to you all. Let's go with our first question. It's an Alexa question from Dave in Crediton. Has Meghan Markle been proved right about the firm around the royal family? This is in the light of, well, what we've been talking about over the last hour on LBC. Lady Susan Hussey's sort of interrogation of the chief executive of Sister Space Charity. Alistair Carmichael.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll not get dragged into whether Meghan's been proven right or not, because that opens up a whole different can of worms. But, I hear what Susan Hussey has said, and I just despair. At a time when we have a new king who has a record of saying he wants to modernise the monarchy, to find that there are still people who hold attitudes like this at the heart of the Buckingham Palace setup is really dispiriting. Let's try and find a positive in this. Let's hope that actually this will now act as a catalyst for change within Buckingham Palace and within the royal household, so that you do see people, a next generation coming on, who will see that this sort of thing just is not, in any circumstance, at any occasion, acceptable.
I suppose what lies behind Dave's question is the fact that Meghan Markle did warn about these kind of attitudes or views before, and this seems, in a way, to have reinforced what she was saying.
Well, and I don't think when you heard some of what Meghan was saying, it was genuinely shocking. But I don't think for the rest of the world it was massively surprising that these attitudes still existed. I suppose perhaps my frustration is that we've become so obsessed with the personality show about Meghan that we've missed the fact that what she was saying really should have been the canary in the coal mine, and that we should have had more proactive measures taken within the palace and the royal household to modernise and make sure that the people who were there were not going to be people who would put themselves and the household, the monarchy, in this situation.
Andrea Leadsom.
Well, I think Alistair's absolutely right that this definitely will be a clarion call. So I'm quite sure that the royal household will be looking very carefully at who goes out to speak on behalf of them. I'm also certain that Lady Susan Hussey will be absolutely mortified about this. I mean, she's somebody who's given a lifetime of service to the Queen, and what an awful way for that to end. So I think there's no winners here. It's a very sad situation, but there can be no room for any form of racism whatsoever at any level of our society. It's just completely unacceptable. So she's done the right thing by stepping aside, that's for sure.
Has she, though? Because the person whose questions that she's subjected to says she shouldn't have had to go. She actually feels rather sorry for her.
Well, I also feel very sorry for her. And as I say, here's someone who's given a lifetime of service, and it's a
She was the lady waiting
position.
to Her Majesty the Queen, not the current Queen.
Exactly, the Queen Consort.
Yeah.
Yes,
and,
exactly.
And of course, she was also the wife of the former chairman of the BBC, Duke Hussey, wasn't she?
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, on the one hand, you'd think she would have been a bit more, perhaps, up to speed. I mean, a lady who is 83 years old, but who has been so closely involved with the Queen for so many years, the Queen who has met millions of people, and you can absolutely be sure that the Queen held no sort of side whatsoever. So, I mean, I suspect that this is probably a terrible accident, and I'm quite sure that there'll be great upset about it. But nevertheless, it's the right decision. We cannot tolerate any form of racism, and particularly not in such a valuable institution.
Do you actually think this was a form of racism then?
It certainly appears that it came across that way. I mean, obviously, I wasn't stood there, but it certainly, having sort of read what was said and repeatedly asked, assuming that somebody presenting in the way that that was the case must not be British, and so that is offensive. There's absolutely no shadow of a doubt about that. So yes, I mean, I'm quite sure it wasn't intended to be racist, but it would certainly have come across that way.
Alva Ray, I suppose the only mitigation that might be offered here is that she was 83, from a different generation. I mean, I don't know what her background is, whether she was sort of part of the empire or whatever. I mean, it's not an excuse, but it may be a little bit of an explanation.
Well, the thing I find so perplexing about this is that, as we've all been saying, Lady Hussey was the Queen's lady-in-waiting for most of her reign, will have been attending royal events like this, speaking to members of the public for decades. And why is this the first time that something like this popped up? Is this the first time she expressed an attitude like this? Or is it actually just the first time that someone has been brave enough to actually call it out? That's, I think, the thing that I don't get. I mean, you would have thought that someone with a kind of public supporting role, not someone with a public profile herself, but someone who, as a representative of the sovereign, essentially, who will have attended public events, ribbon cuttings and things on the Queen's behalf for a very long time, you would have expected a higher standard. And I think that, I mean, we're all quite sympathetic. We all know a sort of an older person who finds, attitudes a bit confusing, but I'm not quite sure that really covers it in this sense, because also, older people, the Queen was, well into her 90s, still performing that role. And, her age was never some sort of excuse for a lower standard.
Because the thing is, I mean, OK, we don't have a person of colour on this panel, but I don't think that question would be asked to any of us. I mean, it might be asked to you, Alistair, about where do you come from in Scotland because of your accent, or Alva with your Northern Irish accent, but that... So we wouldn't ever get asked that question, would we? Well,
exactly, and if you're born in Britain, people wouldn't be looking at the colour of your skin, thinking, but where are you really from? Yeah. Essentially, telling this CEO who's made a great contribution to British society that she couldn't really be from Britain because she was black. I mean, I think. If people don't understand, I don't know if you've had other callers who sort of haven't got that, but if you can't understand why that's not acceptable, I can't help you.
It actually has been asked of me in Buckingham Palace.
Has it?
Not just whereabouts in Scotland are you from, but it was somebody who knew that I'd been born and brought up on Ireland. She, as it happened, did know my family, and it was about building a connection. Yeah. And if in that context, it's perfectly
and that's
acceptable.
What I mean. In these kinds of receptions, that's what you want to do.
That's what you want to do. You want to make people feel at ease because you've got something in common. And look, in politics, we do this sort of thing all the time. But that's an explanation. But it's no excuse for the way in which it was handled. And it might be. I see it in my own family, and I'm not going to go any further than that. But, as people get older, sometimes a few of the filters that we take for granted just aren't there.
I met the Queen once at a Buckingham Palace reception, and she didn't say, "Where do you come from?" She said, "And what do you do?" Tom Hamilton.
Yeah, it's such a cliche, isn't it? I mean, we've all heard the where are you from, where are you really from, sort of story told by lots of people from various different backgrounds, particularly people from ethnic minority backgrounds. And the fact that it's such a cliche should tell us that what I think we're all furiously agreeing about this here, but what anyone in public life in particular ought to know, which is that is clearly not acceptable. If the answer to where are you from is I'm from Hackney, that's the end of that bit of the conversation. Yes. You move on to talk about something else. And as Alva says, taking it further suggests that you're not prepared to accept that part of the question, that people from visibly ethnic minority backgrounds have more to do to explain where they're from, what their origin is, than those of us who are not from those backgrounds. And it's clearly a double standard.
Well, there's a follow-up question here from Sam in Cambridge. Should the King and Queen Consort be... I'm stopping calling her Queen Consort. She's the Queen. Can we just agree that we can call her the Queen? Should
It's
the King...
confusing, though.
It is. Should the King and Queen be employing younger and more socially aware people to work in the royal household now? Well, let's bear in mind the King and Queen are both in their 70s themselves. So, I mean, I think... you've got to have a mixture of people in a household. I mean, I'm sure if you were Queen, you would want a mixture of backgrounds as well, wouldn't you?
And they absolutely do. I mean,
You are the Queen of our hearts anyway, Andrea.
Thank you, Ian. And not right back at you. Is that appropriate?
Oh
dear,
goodness.
no.
That could go viral in a very unfortunate way.
Okay.
Burn.
Yikes,
Our digital
tin
people are
hats.
listening to it right now.
But no, I mean, I spent 2 years as Leader of the Commons, and with that is President of the Privy Council. So actually did have the enormous privilege of going to Buckingham Palace a lot and seeing the Queen and members of the household. And it is incredibly varied. You know, some very young people there, people in all different roles, all different supporting roles. So I don't think it's sort of the case that they now need to clear out a bunch of, 80-year-olds and replace them with 20-year-olds. It's not like that. I mean, it is a thriving, it's a huge industry, actually, the royal household.
Now, as the two youngest people on the panel tonight, Tom and Alva, do you think that maybe this is an opportunity for the royal family to maybe modernise a little bit, get some more younger people involved?
Well, in the sense that there's at least one vacancy, yes, I suppose it is. But I think I'm quite a lot older than Alva is, so it's nice to be cast as the younger generation for possibly the last time in my life. I mean, clearly, it's not so much this event as the change of monarch that gives an opportunity for some things to change, for some of the staff to move on. I think that will probably happen quite naturally. This happened in quite an unnatural way, but I think it's perfectly reasonable that you're going to have a certain amount of staff turnover, and as that happens, I think they will, I hope, want to think about the kinds of people and the kinds of skills and the kinds of backgrounds that they want their staff to have. I don't think this is a moment for necessarily a rapid, a wholesale changing of the guard, to give a sort of Buckingham Palace phrase.
Alva?
Well, I mean, my understanding is that the King decided in this case that all the people who had served as ladies in waiting to the late Queen should stay on in some capacity as essentially, I can't remember the title, but essentially ladies in waiting to him, while employing or bringing on more of his own people, and the Queen Consort the same. Still saying Queen Consort for the purposes of this sentence. But as a kind of sort of warm gesture, so that these people, as we were saying, into their 80s weren't suddenly finding themselves in a completely new position towards the ends of their lives. But I think that there's a kind of more fundamental problem, which is not really that surprising, that this is a very white family, this is a very white institution, and these are the upper classes. All these ladies in waiting and so on are just essentially aristocrats or wives of aristocrats, and that's the top of the British establishment is very white. And I suppose this idea that suddenly you sort of employ younger people or more ethnic minorities. I mean, I think that's a good idea, but in a way that once you interrogate that too deeply, you think, but actually none of the people in the upper classes are really that diverse, and that's probably a bigger question about that whole system.
Well, of course, the irony is that, of course, if you ask this question to the King, he would have to answer Germany, wouldn't he? I mean, that's a logical conclusion. But, of course, no one ever would, because he's white. Simple as that. Right, we will move on. 0345 6060 973 if you'd like to ask a question of our panel. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
19 minutes past 8. Dame Andrea Leadsom is here. Alistair Carmichael from the Liberal Democrats. Tom Hamilton, former head of research for the Labour Party. It says former here. What do you actually do now, Tom?
I work for a public affairs consultancy called WPI Strategy.
OK. And Alva Ray is the presenter of Politico's Westminster Insider podcast. And just explain why that is different to any other podcast that might be out there on the market.
It is quite different. It's actually quite a lot of work. Tiny violin.
I'm saying that my podcasts aren't, Alva.
Well, so rather than it being just one chat, it's more sort of documentary style. We interview lots of different people separately, and then we sort of weave it through a script. We speak to lots of people in background. We use lots of things from the archive. I read loads of books for every episode. We've got a really good episode coming out on Friday morning about the whipping system with some quite interesting recent chief whips. Not you, Alistair, but someone who may have been chief whip to Liz Truss will be chatting to us.
That would be very interesting.
But also looking back at the past of that whole murky world of Westminster discipline. So it's quite fun.
See, I think the murky world is not really as murky as everybody likes to think it is.
You would say that.
They've all read, House of Cards, and they think they know how it works as a consequence.
Well, you were Lib Dem chief whip,
I was Lib Dem chief whip twice.
That can't be very difficult. There's only, 12 of you?
Oh, well, yes, there were 56 when I started.
Oh, right,
that can tell you something.
You got rid of them all.
He did a Francis circuit.
One of the reasons why all the House of Card myths, persist is that whips have always been so reluctant to talk about what they actually do. And once you start talking about it, you realise an awful lot is really pretty mundane. It's not all about
Giles Brandreth was a whip in the Major government, and he published his diaries of that period.
Breaking the code.
And one of the best political diaries there are. And he got sent 30 pieces of silver by his former colleagues in the whip's office because he had broken the whip's omerta. It's sort of lightened up a bit since then, I think. Right, let's go to another question. It's from Cam in Nuneaton. Hello, Cam.
Hello.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
It was basically, would any political party be able to change the illegal migration on the Channel crossings?
So, of course, the government's coming under a lot of criticism at the moment for not reducing the numbers. Labour clearly criticising them. So are you basically asking, do you think Labour would do any better?
Basically, yeah, because they seem to not have many ideas regarding tax and everything else. It seems just to be 3.2 billion here, there, and not really anywhere else with any sort of plan.
Tom Hamilton, this is quite a difficult one, isn't it, for any political party, because there is no magic solution here, and it is the job of the opposition to criticise the government. But if you were in your former position as head of research, I mean, what policies are there that you could propose which the electorate would think, yeah, actually, that could work?
I think it's fair enough for an opposition party to focus on holding the government to account for its failures. And I think on immigration, there are manifest failures of what the government, what the Conservative Party itself said that it was going to do, not just on channel crossings, but on net migration as a whole. And I think irrespective of what anyone thinks ought to be the case, it is simply true that they said that net migration ought to go down, and it's gone up very significantly. They said they wanted to deal with the problem of small boats in the Channel, and that problem hasn't gone away. I think it's fair enough for Labour to focus on that as a point of criticism and holding the government to account. Going forward, as we get towards an election, I think Labour is clearly going to have more to say about what it would do differently. And I must say, I don't work for the Labour Party anymore. I'm not entirely clear what they are currently saying should happen. I think they will need to have something going forward, whether that's about more funding or about agreements with foreign governments or what. But I think it's really important for Labour, but actually for the media as well, on issues where the government is underperforming, not to immediately pivot to saying, but what would Labour do? But to say, well, what is going on now? What are the the problems that the government is experiencing? What are the reasons for that? And are they dealing with them properly? I mean, it's been really interesting to hear how strongly Suella Braverman has talked about the need to tackle small boats. The government has a real ambition to get the Rwanda policy going, but as far as I can see, the Labour position and the Conservative position on Rwanda is they're both not going to send anyone to Rwanda. It's just that the Tories are saying they're going to send someone to Rwanda. So
these lefty lawyers. Well, that's the problem.
Lefty lawyers. You can call it lefty lawyers. Or you can call it the law. This is been guidelines have been passed by various governments over various decades.
I mean, Andrea Leadsom, this is a long-running problem, and the government clearly haven't got to grips with it. Can anyone?
Well, it is incredibly complicated, and up to a point, I think Tom's right to say that it's fair for the opposition to be challenging the government on the government's record, because clearly the government has not managed to finally sort out what is a seemingly intractable problem. But where the illegal crossings are concerned, that is a disastrous situation, because the people who are, committing crimes to get the money to pay the people traffickers, or indeed leaving mum and their children and their more vulnerable family behind whilst they go off to strike a new future for themselves. This is disastrous. This is an appalling industry that's sprung up. And so I think the government is absolutely right to be determined to tackle it come what may, just because that industry cannot be allowed to survive. We did manage to tackle the people smuggling through lorries. Now you don't tend to find people smuggling in lorries.
It's just displaced it, hasn't it?
And it's displaced it to small boats, which is even more dangerous. And in my view, the big mistake, and actually I'm just going to say, I personally think that the Rwanda policy, in principle, there is nothing wrong with that. Now, we can argue about whether Rwanda is the right place, and we can say, no, in fact, it should be, somewhere else that is where the United Nations or the EU send illegal migrants to be processed. But it is the right principle, because what you're then doing is you're removing the desire to get on that boat and come to England.
You are if everyone is sent there.
Yeah.
If
how do we know if they're illegal migrants if we haven't processed their claims?
I don't particularly want to go into all the rights and rules of Rwanda, but I mean, there are things that the government could do that they haven't done. For example, several EU countries, Sweden, Germany being two, they don't accept any applications from Albanians. Why do we? Why can't we do the same thing?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with that, and I just genuinely don't know the answer to that. Genuinely don't know. I mean, I think the issue, of course, is one of life and limb. So if you're in a dinghy and you're in the middle of the English Channel and there's big waves, then what are you going to do? Say, no, turn around, go back. And therein lies the problem, is people's lives are in danger. So the Coast Guard does rescue them to here.
It's a miracle, actually, that more people haven't lost their lives.
It really is.
Absolutely is.
Exactly, yeah.
Alva?
Gosh, where to begin on this one? I suppose, do I need to be the person on the panel to interrogate the phrase illegal immigration in the first place? I actually think maybe a little bit of part of the problem is that, if people are so desperate for a new life and new opportunities that they are prepared to leave everything they know behind.
But that isn't the case with all of it, is it? 25% of them are now Albanians, and Albania is not a war-torn country.
I think that there isn't as much of a difference between economic migration and asylum seeking as people like to think. If you're desperate enough to want to seek a new life, I don't think that being an economic migrant is the worst thing in the world, or that we need to sort of spell those people.
And we need economic migrants.
Yeah, I think that this idea of sort of spelling people as illegal and sort of suggesting that it's only valid to seek opportunities in other countries if you're in a war zone is probably just a little bit wrong. But actually the main thing that I think recent years have shown is that obviously, depending on your political perspective, you really want a tough line on migration or you don't. But the tough line on its own doesn't work.
It's not a political view. It's not a political view. It's a view of fairness.
If I can just finish, the Priti Patel, for example, struck a very, very tough line. no one's under any illusions about where she stood on that. But crossings in small boats went up and up and up. The rhetoric on its own just, counted for nothing. And I actually think that a lot of the answer to this is quite unsexy behind the scenes stuff around how you staff asylum centres, or, are they properly staffed, how you recruit them, if they have the right skills, if it's properly resourced.
That
and then
be true.
No, a lot of it is
that's
actually.
No, because what you
Very
what
quickly,
you,
Andrea,
you
because I need to go to Alistair.
You have to take away the pull factor. In my constituency, I've got people who are not eating 3 meals a day. They can't afford to heat themselves. They can't get NHS dentists. And the fact is, I also have a hotel in my constituency where people who came on small boats are getting 3 square meals a day. They're getting money each week. They've got a clean bed to sleep in and access to NHS dentists. There is an issue of fairness.
If those centres were staffed properly, those people could be sent back sooner.
Alistair.
Well, first of all, Andrea's hotel. Remember, Andrea, only 4% of asylum applications last year were actually processed. So if hotels up and down the country are getting filled with people who are awaiting and processing with their asylum seekers, their asylum applications, then that is because of the inadequacy of the way the Home Office handles these
Well,
things.
I completely agree with you there.
Look at the people who are coming across in the small boats. It's not people from Hong Kong. It's not people from Ukraine. Why is that? That's because we offer people from Hong Kong and Ukraine safe and legal routes to come here. And, the people who are coming here are people in small boats who will have a reason for wanting to come here. They may have a family connection or for whatever reason. Well, they would have a family connection here rather than in France.
That does not entitle you to just move somewhere.
We have an obligation in international law to take them if they have a proper asylum claim. We should be processing that when they come here by a safe and legal route, and if they have a justified claim, then yes, we should be
Alistair,
allowing them.
you know that the first thing people do is to ditch their papers. It's impossible to track down where they have come from.
I'll tell you what I do know. I know that 98% of the people who make that crossing in small boats apply for asylum when they get here, and that the overwhelming number of those applications, something between 70 and 80%, are then allowed. So when you talk about illegal asylum seekers, actually, the overwhelming majority of them are actually people who, on the estimation of our own Home Office, are allowed to be here.
Okay.
They come here for a reason. They're not coming as economic migrants, and people who do come here as economic migrants, of course, must be dealt with differently.
Okay, well, Cam, thank you very much for your question. We'll come on to more questions in just a moment. It's 8:31 on LBC. Time for the news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
Prince William says racism has no place in our society after comments made to a black woman at Buckingham Palace. And Ngozi Fulani, who runs a charity in Hackney, was repeatedly asked where she was really from. The woman has apologised and resigned. The government's having to ask police to use cells to hold prisoners due to overcrowding. The last time they made that request was back in 2008. Fleetwood Mac star Christine McVie has died at the age of 79. The singer-songwriter and musician who joined the band in 1970 had recently been ill. Her family says she was loved universally. LBC weather dry for most, with some outbreaks of rain in the north tonight with lows of 1. Largely cloudy tomorrow with some sunshine for Wales and the southwest of England, highs of 12 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:35. Andrea Leadsom, Alistair Carmichael, Tom Hamilton and Alva Ray with me answering your questions. Before we go into the questions, though, anything you want to plug, Andrea? Early years. We haven't heard much about you from early years lately. I mean, Boris Johnson was really behind that, but we've now had 2 different prime ministers since then. Are they still as committed to it?
I'm making sure that they are.
There's a surprise.
Yeah, no, we're doing well, actually, and in fact, you'll want me back here in a few weeks' time when there'll be more to talk about, if you get my drift.
Ooh.
Big announcements on the way. But no, it's fantastic, actually. What's really lovely is in the Conservative government DNA is this desire to really turn around the Start for Life, so families get a much better support network, but also a better start for their baby. And it's just been so important. COVID's really shown the devastating impact of lockdowns and lack of help.
Well, we've got a related question to this, funnily enough, from Ben.
Excellent.
Ben in
Ben
Ilkley.
Leadsom.
No, not Ben. Well, it might be.
I did tell him to.
Ben, you're not Mr. Leadsom, are you?
Well, no, I'm not.
No, but he wishes he were.
I'll leave him to judge that.
Oh, okay.
Go on, Ben.
Yeah, so my question was, what can be done to help parents with the extortionate costs of childcare fees before primary school?
I've got to come to you first.
Yeah, you've really got to.
Yeah, no, because my life wouldn't be worth living if I didn't.
Yes, I'll just punch you. You should never sit me next to you, Iain. That's the trouble. I mean, actually a lot, and you're absolutely right, the extortionate cost of childcare, but also the difficulty with finding childcare places is another real issue. The government is looking very closely at this, I know, and I'm kind of trying to stick my oar in. I mean, my own personal view is that families should have a budget for childcare so that whatever the amount of state subsidised childcare you get, it should be for you to decide at what age your baby is when you use it, because the problem at the moment is that it's all available from age 3 unless you meet certain criteria, in which case it's age 2, and then it's this number of hours a week and blah, blah, blah. Much better to say to parents, great, you've got a baby, you've now got 5,000 hours of free childcare before your child goes to school, and then put it into the hands of parents. So quite apart from what you do then with the budget for childcare, but you'd give parents the flexibility, because I mean, Ben, it'd be interesting to know what you think about this, but it's not just the extortionate cost of it, but also how hard it is to manage your sort of work-life balance when you're trying to deal with when there's a space available.
Ben, let's go back to you. Do you want to just take up that point from Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, with respect, Andrea, I think the danger of moving into like giving a budget is it reduces the incentive for, it's bad to say, but it is generally the mother who takes the sacrifice. And that's I don't know exactly what your budget would entail in terms of that, but that is the danger, that it goes down rather than fully funding places. I think, for instance, there's a charity called Pregnant Then Screwed, which has discussed this before, so I think they'd be brilliant to speak to. But yeah, in terms of balancing hours, I'm currently working now. Me and my wife both, we earn a decent amount of money, and we both compress our hours because, for instance, to send our 2-year-old to nursery 5 days a week is cheap, so it's probably more expensive than if we were to send them to a private secondary school.
Yeah,
I mean, that's ridiculous. And the market has gone wrong there somewhere, hasn't it? Alva, let's come to you.
Well, interestingly, if I'm not mistaken, Pregnant Then Screwed was founded by a former Conservative candidate who's a very impressive woman who, with a group of like-minded people, launched this a few years ago. And whenever I've seen her speak most passionately, it's been at Conservative Party conference and one of these fringe events that you get. And I think that there's been this sort of feeling in the grassroots of the Conservative Party for a while, which I'd be interested to hear about from Andrea, that the Conservative Party doesn't cater that well to women. Obviously, this is for whole families, but as Ben was just alluding to, it's so often women who realise that it's going to be it's going to be more expensive to be going to work and paying for childcare than staying at home in those early years. I remember in 2019, a Conservative Party conference, Boris Johnson riding high, but in a group of Conservative women, them saying, look at our polling ratings, even under Theresa May, we were polling so badly among women below, I think, 30, really a tiny proportion of people voting for the Conservative Party. There's not a great Conservative offer for women in that regard, and childcare is one of the big areas where I think they haven't really been delivering for quite a long time. I just think it's interesting that it's Conservative women pointing this out and kind of crying for action on it.
Alistair Carmichael, let me put a controversial point of view to you, which
unlike you, Iain.
I should say it's not necessarily my point of view, but it always used to be the case that if parents wanted to send their children to nursery, that they would pay for it themselves. Why should the taxpayer come to the rescue?
I think it's just a reflection of how people live in a modern life. I come from a family where my father went out and worked, and he came home, had his tea, and then he went out and looked after his own farm at night. My mother stayed home and looked after us. Yeah. My own sort of this generation, I've had a full-time job, my wife's had a full-time professional career, and that's how people live these days, and it is a reflection of the fact that, as we've said, it is fiendishly expensive, and especially because people are having their children when they're young, which is when they're maybe on the bottom of the upward curve of their earning capacity, and where they are not able to meet these needs for themselves, then yes, it's absolutely right that the government should take a role in providing them with that sort of help. Can I say, though, I think early years, though, has got to be about an awful lot more than this. And this, I go back to my own experience. I was a criminal court solicitor before I came into Parliament. And, you looked at the kids who were coming into the criminal justice system either through the children's panel, maybe 12 to 16, or then into the full adult courts at 16. And honestly, Iain, these were kids that you could have identified at weeks old. And, so many of the interventions, although they were done in the name of the best interests of the child, were all too often in the best interests of the parents or the social workers or somebody else. So I think, that early intervention is the point at which you can really turn around the lives of those who are going to have the biggest problems. And I've seen it again in my own family. After we left home, my parents fostered, and I think, look, the state is an exceptionally bad parent. We all know that. But, if we put the resource into good, loving foster homes, supportive foster homes, then that would be the first point. Departure.
Tom Hamilton.
Well, my children recently went through childcare and are now both at school. My youngest was in a nursery until this summer, and the amount of money is extraordinary. As someone who is relatively well off and able to pay for it, nevertheless, at the point when my daughter left nursery to go to school, it felt like the biggest pay rise I'd ever received in my life, because suddenly that amount of money is no longer going into a nursery, and it's something that you can choose what to do with. And the point that your caller made about the fact that it's as expensive as going to private school. I don't know whether we're going to talk about private school today, but the difference with private school, of course, is that's discretionary. You can choose to send your children to a state school for free. You don't have an option if you want if you want to have your children looked after and work. And there's a dimension of this that's purely about the cost of it, but it's an extraordinarily high barrier for a lot of families, in particular for women who want to go out to work, who simply don't have the opportunity to do that, and it can really set them back. So there's a bigger economic challenge that's not just about helping individual people, but about, if we want to be a fully productive economy that's getting the most out of all of our population, then we need to be able to give people the opportunity when they have children to go to work when they want to. I think from a political point of view, one of the real problems actually is that it's a relatively short period for each child that's involved. It's 2 or 3 years, and so from a purely electoral point of view, it's always quite a small cohort that is dealing with that period between about age 1 and about age 4, when the cost is extraordinarily high. But you can get all the way from the beginning to the end of that before you get the chance to vote on anything, and by that point you might have forgotten about it. But for that small cohort that is affected, it is probably the most significant financial outlay that you have.
Okay, right, we'll move on to a very different subject in just a few moments' time. It's 8:45.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Postal workers' strike days. They'll delay letter and parcel deliveries in the run-up to Christmas. Ricky McCauley is operations director at Royal Mail.
We did table an improved offer after 4 weeks of discussions, and the action the CW are taking over the busiest time of year really is holding Christmas to ransom.
John's in Surrey.
You know, he keeps on about how much money Royal Mail are losing.
1.2 million a day.
In my office, the issue is they are paying £40 an hour for agency drivers, and they're using agency staff in the sorting offices. This industrial action is not just about money.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
If you just tuned in, Andrea Leadsom, Alistair, Carmichael, Alva Ray and Tom Hamilton with us. Now, Tom, your book with Aisha Hazarika, Punch and Judy Politics, Insider's Guide to Prime Minister's Questions. You used to brief, I think, Ed Miliband for PMQs. How do you think Rishi Sunak's doing in his first few outings?
So I'm not, partisan hat aside to the extent that I can, I'm not massively impressed with him as a PMQs performer. I think he's a little bit shrill and reedy in his delivery. And I think on a technical level, he moves very quickly from defence to attack, but without really doing the defence very well. It was quite interesting today. He was being asked about private schools, and he didn't have any direct defence of the charge that was being put to him. He had a generic line about Conservative schools policy, fair enough, and then he moved very quickly on to attack that wasn't particularly related to the question. And I think, the difference between David Cameron, he used to address the question. He would always address the question before he moved to attack. Boris Johnson wouldn't address the question, but he'd talk in such an interestingly sort of blustering way that he'd get away with it, and you wouldn't necessarily notice he had answered the question. Liz Truss, in her brief period, did answer the question in quite a lot of detail, and in fact, a lot of good it did her. But I think Sunak's problem, someone pointed out that his conventional answer is, he gets asked a question, he says, you talk about education, let me tell you about education. It's not good enough. You've got to have something substantive to say to the actual question that you're being asked before you go off and say, and also we've got a great record on education.
He seems to get a lot of cheers from the Conservative benches, Andrea.
Well, I think...
unusual for a Tory Prime Minister nowadays.
I think they're just incredibly grateful that he's still there after a couple of weeks. No, I mean, I think he's doing well, actually. I mean, he is confident and he is batting away. He's not absorbing any blows. And yeah, I mean, technically you might be right. Maybe there's more defensive he could do. But this is very, very early days still for him. I think he's doing really well, actually. I think he's a lot more vivacious than Keir Starmer
we have a question slightly allied to this from Jay in St Ives in Cambridgeshire. Jay, hello. What would you like to ask?
Hi, good evening, panel, and hi, Ian. Yeah, basically, this afternoon, Keir Starmer asked. He said that there was a launch of Getting Tough operation. They launched. Rishi Sunak launched the Getting Tough operation, and my question is, can Rishi Sunak learn to be tough? Because to me, it seems he's really weak.
Why do you think he's weak?
I mean, basically, all his answers that one of the panelists just now, he said he's always attacking, like he's trying to be like an incarnation of Boris Johnson, but it's not working. So he's basically attacking.
Alva, you're a seasoned observer of these things. How do you answer Jay's question?
I mean, I think he's coming across as weak because he is. I mean, his position as leader of the Conservative Party is relatively secure. I don't think that they're prepared to go through that all again. But, I mean, the morale, I mean, speaking to Conservative MPs when you're just around the House of Commons, morale is so low. They all feel that they're on their way out of government, even if it takes 2 years. So many of them are expecting to lose their seats. We've had a flurry of them sort of announce that they won't be standing again. They don't want to put themselves through it. They want to frame the inevitable loss of their seat as a positive choice. They never wanted to stand again anyway. And so Rishi Sunak doesn't have a lot of power. I think if people don't feel like he'll be in place for that long, they don't have that much incentive to stick with him. You know, people hoping for ministerial careers, you know, don't think that they're going to get there in the next 2 years. So we're getting all these rebellions. And I think that's where the lack of toughness comes from. Even if people are cheering behind him on the Conservative backbenches privately, Tory MPs are just kind of despairing, I'd say.
Tom?
Yeah, I think, he is in a structurally weak position because the Conservative Parliamentary Party is clearly quite divided, and on a whole range of pieces of legislation, it doesn't have a united position, and there are all sorts of rebel amendments where we don't quite know which way the government is going to fall. I think one of the issues for Rishi Sunak is that throughout his career, at least since he became a prominent politician as Chancellor, he's been characterised by taking quite a strong position on an issue, finding that position was not politically tenable for whatever reason, whether because of internal pressure or external pressure, and then changing his mind and saying that was the right thing to do all along. And if you do that over and over again as a politician, people start to sense weakness. And that happened in the leadership campaign as well. He lost the leadership campaign for various reasons, but at the point that it became clear that he was going to lose, he shifted his position on quite a number of really key issues, became more like Liz Truss on various policies. He now says that he was telling the truth to the Conservative
Party. Even a bit like Keir Starmer has done, jettisoned all of his leadership campaign.
Well, there's a difference. And the difference is, one is that I actually think a lot of Keir Starmer's leadership campaign positions are being fulfilled or will be fulfilled as we go forward. But I think it's actually a really important distinction between someone who is running for the leadership when they know that they don't have a shot at being in government for 4 or 5 years, and someone who's running for the leadership knowing that if they win, they'll be the Prime Minister that day. I think you cannot spend a leadership campaign to be Prime Minister right now, saying this is roughly what I want to do, and then do something different when you come in. It's not a sustainable position. Whereas Starmer or any opposition leader has time to build a platform, work out what needs to stay and what needs to go, and build towards a manifesto.
Alexa message from Jim. Iain, you're sounding extremely butch tonight. Maybe you should have a cold more often. There we go. Glad I'm appealing to a certain clientele. Alistair?
I think there's quite a lot of truth in what Tom says about the way Rishi Sunak approaches it. You know, he's not found his groove yet, and he doesn't address the question, and as a consequence, he doesn't come across well. You address the question, you then pivot on to what you want to say about the subject, and he's clearly got to learn that. As Andrea says, it's early days, you know, so it could all change from yet. Personally, I don't think it makes that much difference, because I think since the disastrous mini-budget, the Conservatives have simply lost permission to be heard by the country. We're back to a very similar political territory than we were in the 1990s after Black Wednesday. But remember, we're sitting here in a radio studio with politicians and political commentators talking about Prime Minister's questions because we love this stuff. Remember, William Hague outperformed Tony Blair brilliantly and still lost the next election by 166 seats. So, you know, just a Prime Minister's... There's a lot more to politics than that half hour between 12 and 12:30 on a Wednesday afternoon.
Andrea?
Well, you've just heard from 3 non-Conservative voters who are all talking their own book. But, yeah, I do not...
Well, you don't know how I vote, Andrea.
Absolutely. I absolutely do not think that the Conservatives are, are out, and all of the doom and gloom
quite a few of your colleagues do.
Well, no, I don't actually... No, that's... 4 people.
Oh, come on. No,
4 people.
No.
There's always many more.
Many of them are one of them's in their 20s and some of them are in their 30s.
Yeah, but
that's unusual.
Well, it is unusual, but then this has been a very unusual Parliament. I am staying. 2019 was a very unusual situation because we had a whole bunch of people became MPs who didn't expect to become MPs, and then within a few months they were in lockdown. So that kind of esprit de corps was quite difficult to achieve for some of our new colleagues. So I'm not surprised to see more people retiring from politics, but I also don't agree with the characterisation that heads are down and that we're all thinking it's all over. That is not the case at all. So now a serious answer to the fact that the Conservatives are cheering Rishi at PMQs is because genuinely he's got the backing of the party, and he's doing a lot actually behind the scenes to reach out to different MPs to make sure that they're getting to do the things they're interested in doing. Me with my earliest... Have I ever told you about that, Iain? Oh, sorry.
Look, unfortunately, we've only got
they're cheering him because he's... Thank God he's turned up, It's not going to be my turn. It's not going to be my turn this week.
Let's move on to our final fun text question from Katie in Ipswich. A new list of the most streamed Christmas songs reveals the number 1 is a song by Ed Sheeran, which isn't even about Christmas. But panel, given we're only 3 hours from December now, which one Christmas song could you happily go the entire month without hearing at all? And if any of you say anyone by Cliff Richard, you will never be invited back to this programme. I warn you now. So which is your most hated Christmas song? Tom?
I knew you'd come to me first. I'm going to say probably All I Want for Christmas Is You does not do it for me.
Alva?
Oh, I think that's quite a bah humbug question. I don't think I have a...
I thought we were going to get what's your favourite one, but no.
Yeah, what's your favourite one? I would have a short list of about 10.
You're being a politician and answering the question that I haven't asked you.
I don't think I hate any Christmas songs. I mean, I'm sure there's actually... Christmas Lights by Coldplay is just not a very good Christmas song, but there's a reason you don't hear that very much at Christmas, because it's not very good. So I'm not so worried about hearing that one.
Alistair?
I'm afraid for me it's Wham! Last Christmas. I don't know. It's just all the years I worked in bars and restaurants in the 1980s, and when we started playing it in the bar, you thought, oh dear God, here we go again.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Andrea?
I mean, I just love everything Christmas. I'm going to have to do a Alva answer and say I could tell you my favourite one is Michael Bublé's version of It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas.
Michael Bublé.
I might play that for you right now, actually.
No.
Oh, he's fantastic. The crooner from Canada.
It won't be anything by Boy George, because last night I said that he came across as a rather nasty piece of work on I'm a Celebrity. Ooh. And he then quote tweeted it and called me and LBC a word beginning with C.
Ooh.
And not a very nice one.
Christmas?
And I just... No. And I just replied saying, well, you've rather made my point for me, haven't you? Which he didn't reply to. Right, thank you all very much indeed to Dame Andrea Leadsom, Alistair Carmichael, Tom Hamilton and Alva Ray. In the next hour, we're going to be talking prisons and police cells, because we like to keep it cheerful at Christmas. It's 9 o'clock.
On your radio, on Global Player, and...
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, a member of the royal household has resigned over marks made to a black charity worker at Buckingham Palace. The Prince of Wales's godmother has apologised after she asked Ngozi Fulani where she was really from. Ngozi has told LBC she was repeatedly questioned.
She wanted to know which part of Africa I'm from. And I said, I'm born here, but African heritage. And then it just went into this whole thing, which became